What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? I'm the Godless engineer, and I critically analyze apologists' claims to give you the best arguments and information so that you can stand up and use your voice. But today we're here to talk about a somewhat new book that's out there on Amazon. I should have it linked in the description of this video if you would like to go and check it out. I've been reading it, and I'm a slow reader, so I'm not that far into it. I got the book initially, and I just haven't been able to pick it up yet because I've been busy actually doing an audiobook that we'll talk about here in a little bit. So today we are with Peter. Is it DiGangi?
We've been saying DiGangi my whole life, but my son studied in Rome on his semester abroad, and it turns out it is DiGangi.
Really?
Oh, okay.
I would have thought it was DiGangi. In American Italian, it would be DiGangi, right?
Yeah, that's how I've been going all my life.
Interesting. Old country Italian, it's DiGangi. Exactly. All right, yeah.
But we've got Peter DiGangi here talking about his book, Dying for the Faith. And Peter, do you kind of want to lay out what is your book about, and how did you come about to write it?
Happy to do that. Richard doesn't need an introduction, I guess, right? Yeah. Your audience is more than familiar.
I mean, if anybody does need to know who I am, it's historian of antiquity. With a lot of other credentials and fingers in various other pies. So yeah, anybody wants to know who the hell I am, why I'm doing here, richardcarrier.info. You can just go there and check out all things me. But the main reason is that in addition to being an independent scholar in ancient history with full quals and publications and all that, I often get hired by writers like Peter who want to do books and they want a certain level of realism and don't want to make egregious history mistakes. Even we'll talk about the idea, the difference in how far you can deviate from history and still because it's fiction, you can obviously do that. And we'll talk about that. But anyway, this is one of the projects that I've been hired to help consult on. And Peter actually had other scholars consulting with him too, on the development of this book. And so that's why Peter wanted me on to talks about some of the history side of all of this and how it fits in to that perspective. So that's what I'm doing here, is to sort of weigh in as the historian. And then I guess as a philosopher, because we'll be talking a bit about the difference between history and fiction and how that matters. So that'll come up too. And I think that's important because I often get asked a lot of questions about things like this. Why don't I do a fiction book that tells a story of this, the origins of Christianity, if there wasn't a Jesus? I could write a fiction book that was doing it. There's a reason why I don't do that, and we'll talk about that. But I'm happy to be hired as a consultant on people, and I've actually, it's been several books. Peter's is not the only one. He's just the one who openly says that that he had historical consultants helping him. But I've read a lot, and there's a lot of different styles of approaches to doing this. It's different manuscripts have come across my desk. Some are more action adventure, some go more into the Jewish side, some go more into the Christian side. Different takes and so forth. It is interesting. I feel like right now there's a lot of interest in doing this in a way that's different from the Dan Brown fashion. What was that, 10, 20 years ago, when Dan Brown created this whole, there was a big rush to do Jesus related fiction. And I didn't like any of that stuff historically. So now there's interesting exploration of, it's taking it more seriously. I think it's not a modern adventure novel. It's anyway, yeah, I'm rambling too much, but let's have Peter describe the book. Sure. What's in the book? What's the mission of the book, etc.
Absolutely. So started basically, I saw Richard do a lecture on science in the Greco-Roman Empire. This was 2016, 17. I don't know when you actually did the lecture, but that's when I saw it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't believe, holy cow, they knew a lot more than I would have given them credit for.
Yeah, I came to that.
Yeah.
I had the same reaction. When I was studying at Columbia, I was like, wait a minute, this can't be right. It's holy crap, everything I was told was wrong. Yeah,
and
right. Exactly.
Now, would you also agree, though, that they kind of knew certain things but got there the wrong way?
Yes, and they were debating things that really shouldn't have been debatable, like the heliocentrism geocentrism debate I can explain and understand why that debate was still going, but it really could have been resolved sooner than it was. And in fact, it may have been like it had everything not gone to shit in the 3rd century. They might have gotten there by the 4th century, right? Like it's totally plausible. And I think it was the fiction of what was it, Agora, the movie that was about Hypatia, posited like, and it was kind of like, this is a good example of fiction, by the way. So they in the story, I don't know if people know the movie, but Agora is about the last scientist / philosopher who's horrifically murdered by a Christian mob at the behest of the Christian leadership. So it was like, it was probably one of the most horrible deaths that you could think of, way worse than Jesus ticks around that. And so it wasn't directly like this. It was a well done movie. It'll make you cry. The acting is really great. The writing is really great. It is really like on the nose on purpose for the Middle East crisis today. Like it's very much making you think like, holy shit, this has been going on there for like 2,000 years and they still haven't gotten their shit together. So it's a really good movie. But what it does is it has a scene where Hypatia figures it out, where basically she figures out Galilean relativity and realizes that the heliocentric theory is correct. But the way it happens in the movie is like she's killed right after that, so no one finds out. So she's prevented from telling the world what she discovered, and it was an entirely plausible scene, because what she does is exactly the kind of stuff you see from Galen and these other scientists. So it was a very well written fiction, but obviously total fiction. We don't believe that happened.
Right.
But it was realistic and it was poetic in the sense like that was the whole. What Christianity inadvertently railroaded science and destroyed it for 1,000 years, not deliberately to do this, destroy science. It's just their whole like spiel ended up grinding it under, and the same like the politics that ended up killing her did destroy any progress that she would have made, and it was, so she was kind of a symbol for Western science altogether, and it was just really good fiction in that sense. But the idea, like the plausibility of it, is also like important. It's not like a ridiculous story, but it is false, right? Like fiction is literally false. Like we have no reason to believe that she figured that out or any of that stuff. And that's relevant to, I think, any of these books that like yours, Peter, that come out, where that's what you're doing is you're building plausible fictions, maybe within a particular structure, like a genre or a style. You're not trying to pass off like a lost manuscript or something, right? Like that's
right, exactly.
That's not what you're doing. So and it's also like it's not like, oh, you're not saying like this is absolutely what happened 100%, right? Like it's just like, no, this is to explore ideas about what probably or possibly could have happened, and why it would make sense. And that's what fiction does, right? Is explore the possibilities in those regards.
Right. I have more to say about that, but so Agora, how do you spell that? Agora?
Yes.
When did this come up? Because I never heard of this one.
Oh gosh, I want to say 2009, maybe sooner.
Yeah, you familiar with this?
Yeah, it was surprising. It did not get a lot of attention. It's a very well done film. I guess just people didn't like it because it was too cynical about Christianity and Judaism, and I saw it because it was part of an atheist film festival in San Francisco at the time when it came out.
Gotcha.
And no, but I bought it after that because it's such a good film.
Okay, I'll have to look that up. Good. All right, so
I hadn't heard of it either.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry, I asked.
Recommend to everybody. Yeah, definitely see Agora. It's Rachel Weisz, like it's other famous people. Like you'll recognize the actors. You say, "Oh, look who that is."
Yeah. Okay,
so
good.
yeah.
So, anyways, after the lecture was over, the next thing that popped up in the feed was why invent the Jesus?
Yeah, I remember doing that one.
I'm like, what the hell is this all about? And I watched that and couldn't believe it, and that led me to buy this book, which I'm sure your viewers will be familiar with.
See all the notes in there.
Yeah,
that's great.
So I read it back in 2017 now, and it took me a whole 10 months to get through it. It's a textbook, right? And, I appreciate
full academic text.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. Like, I would say, correct me if I'm wrong, Richard, that 80% of the pages have like somewhere between a quarter and a third is dedicated to footnotes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's probably right. Yeah.
Because you're making
The
certain claims.
bibliography alone is like 60 pages.
Yeah, but you got to back up what you're claiming, right? You can't make these kind of claims like other people seem to be doing without any citations.
Right.
So I appreciated that, but it took a long time. And I think it was chapter 12. You said, what can we conclude, right? There's like a page or two of like, well, all right, if this is all right, then how the hell did this happen? And that's pretty much what inspired my, book. There's a slide that I sent to John. If you want to show the first slide, John, can we do that? Should we jump in back and forth? The next one after that, sorry.
Yeah.
So I never heard this quote until after I wrote the book, and it took me 2.5 years to write the book. But basically, I'm like, how come no one has thought to do this? Like, I couldn't believe that no one had thought to take this idea and say, well, if Carrier's right, how the hell does this little cult become the biggest, most influential religion in history?
To be clear, like, there's different ways of doing that. So like a lot of people wanted me to do like literally a 30 AD storyline or something like that. I was like, okay, no. No, but that's not what you did. What you did was you pick it up like just at the beginning of the 2nd century, and yours is the story of how the Gospels get made.
Well, I mean, I start with Paul, though.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, there's a lot in Paul, and then kind of it goes from Paul, like what's going on with Paul, and then how did the Gospels get made? Right. And you wrap this around like I can't remember how much of the modern story you kept. Is it just first and last chapter?
Yeah. No, I have a whole other storyline.
A few that pops back into modern times, because it starts with a campfire discussion and does tie back into the Catholic Church and the sex crimes and all of that kind of stuff, and how that happened. And it depends on this story of how this all started, and it absolutely was. No one was wanting it to end there, right? Like,
correct.
But how did that happen is also part of the story of this. So yeah, it focuses a lot on the decisions, the thinking of people. And I get asked this a lot. Like, people ask, like, well, what were they thinking, right? Like, what was Luke thinking when he wrote the two sword story? That's crazy. Why would he do that? Right. It doesn't make any sense. What was Mark thinking with the fig tree? Like, that he literally says Jesus knew it wasn't the season for figs, so why did he get angry at it? Right? It's like people ask me, like, why would they do this? And then other people will say, like, well, why would they lie? Or like, why would they make this up?
Right.
And it's like, well, there's a lot of reasons why, and any one of which could be true, or a combination of them could be true. We don't know, because we don't get to interrogate the people involved. But the role of like fiction, what you're doing is you're picking the lane. You're essentially saying, well, here's one way that could happen, and how the reasoning happens, and how the sort of like the internal politics and everything.
Right.
And that's a story worth telling, as long as people realize that it is fiction. It's just exploring a possibility. And in that sense, and that's where I helped you to make sure that you didn't like make any massive historical errors or anything like that. But you also have a lot of license. Like, you're free to like make stuff up, and also like the style, like the dialogue style is modern. You weren't trying to recreate an ancient novel. It's not the point of it. It's using a modern discourse style, kind of like the way like Jane Austen's movie Emma got remade in a modern setting as Clueless, the movie Clueless.
Right. Okay. Yep.
Very good movie, by the way. Great comedy. But that is Emma. That is the early 19th century British, romantic novel, right? Essentially. And but they do it in like the modern setting with a modern discourse style and all of that, but it tells the same story. And I think you use that same kind of vehicle. Like, the way people talk is more like how we talk, but you're capturing the ideas of what would really have been thought and said at the time. And that's kind of like the point. Is that a fair description?
And to your point, to amplify that, I had started to try to write in some kind of Tolkien like Old English, dark is my dreams of late, blah, 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 because but then I kind of realized English didn't even exist. So why am I trying to write a form of English that's 1,500 years after these events? I just scrapped that. And quite frankly, one of my editors was like, too modern. This is too modern. You're doing too modern. So I wrote a first chapter as an introduction, essentially just to explain why they're speaking in English.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And then
And it's very like Girl Friday style, right? Like the way the banter and the way that people talk and engage with each other is written that way. But I think that's the point. And you do set it up as explaining why that is, why that's the way the story is being told.
But on top of that, though, then one of my editors said, well, you can't start there and not go back there. So I went back there. But then I worked with a woman, her name is Amaria Orenstein, a literary agent / editor who's like legit. And she was amazing. And she's like, get rid of all that shit because no one cares what you think. I hadn't developed the characters, and it was obvious. It was just like Peter DiGangi saying, because this is all mythicist stuff, anything that's going on now is bullshit. And she's like, no one cares what you think. But then I added that whole element of the pedophile priest scandal.
Yeah, it's a fiction within a fiction, which is, the structure makes sense. Yeah.
So I'm going back and forth from modern times to 1st century AD with Paul, and then the Apostolic Council, and then back to the, modern time with the guys figuring out that the guy committed suicide because he had been molested as a kid, blah, blah, blah. And then back to 2nd century where Luke and Lucia, I create these characters. Luke is actually the guy who writes the Gospel of Luke, but I create this character, Lucia, who represents the mythicist, side of the debate. And, it's kind of a love story. I have to tell you, Robin Walsh was like, no way, she's way too modern. If any woman in 1st, 2nd century Rome was acting this way, they'd cut her head off. But on the other hand, is it Kelly Pearson? Is that her name from Godless Granny?
Pearsall.
Yeah,
Godless Granny. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
She was like, I love Lucia. She's the smartest person in the room, but she can't let people see how smart she is because it's 2nd century Rome. So she has to kind of pretend to be a bimbo. Go ahead, John.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say that I've gotten about 20 or so pages into the book, and I'm a little ways into the 2nd century, the first section of the 2nd century part, and I thought you did a really good job of that section of demonstrating how I guess how closely related the Jesus story is to like all of these other myths that were going around at the time, and how that's very similar to like all these other gods, and just the vast landscape of like the religious culture like in that area. Like it's just so intermingled. Like I like how Lucia kind of played it up. Like this just seems like so many different like other gods that they're just so similar. It's hard for me to keep track. I'm so stupid, kind of thing. Like it was, yeah.
Yeah, that was early on where she kind of gets caught and she's like, oh no, that was my husband told me about this. She's a widow, and she had been taught to read by her husband before he died. And she's like, oh, I guess like she didn't want to get caught being smarter than the guy, the presbyter.
But I do like how that which I don't know if you probably meant to do this. I'm literarily I'm a stupid person, but like I do like how in just the very first what I've been able to read in it, it's like there's so many thousands of years between these two time periods that you're going through, but it's like the reactions of people seem to be the same. Like I got the reactions from some of the characters at the very beginning, kind of were the same as the reactions of the presbyter, because it's like they were very offended immediately by like even questioning like some of the things that were being said and everything, and like the presbyter was like, you need to set Lucia right, like she's listening to all this like crazy stuff, and it's like I saw the beginnings, at least maybe it's because I've interacted on this topic like with just people so much that like I could see the formation in the very beginning, like, oh, they're being very resistant to like all of this questioning of like the religious text and everything like that. And immediately with the Bartholomew in the very first part of the 2nd century section, he was like, you need to set her right. She's thinking crazy stuff.
And she says, like, I thought we were agreed, like, if you're curious and you're discouraged or censored, that creates skepticism. And that's definitely how I felt growing up. Like, why are they afraid to answer these questions? You know, and I think that only creates more questions, right? I mean, that's what you deal with a lot on the other show, right?
Yeah, that reminds me of the Big Short, where the lead character was a real guy. It was talking about how he likes to argue this situation, likes to argue with people when something doesn't make sense. And it was a story about in his childhood where his rabbi called his mom to complain that he's studying the Torah too much. He says, "What do you mean he's studying the Torah too much?" He says, "He's trying to find contradictions in the Word of God." And he's like trying to get her to make him stop. Yeah. But her first question is, "Did he find any?" Which tells you like the different attitudes about this. Is like, well, yeah, like, but are there? And then you have the one side, it's like, you can't. You're not allowed to do that. You can't question this stuff. And then other people are like, but wait a minute, why can't we question this stuff? Well, so yeah, the same attitude, the sort of two conflicting ways of approaching sacred literature is illustrated in that.
But I'm very gratified, John, that you picked up that, that soon too, like, because that's exactly what I was intending. So thank you.
Okay. No, yeah, and I'm like I said, literally, I'm not all that smart. I didn't do so well, but like after high school and like college and everything, and as I've been reading stuff, I've been picking up on more of the literary stuff there. But sorry, you were about to say something there, Peter.
So then I reached out. I got about a third 30 pages in, and I reached out to Richard about sort of trying to navigate the possible versus probable versus plausible versus probable spectrum. Like, so if I'm going to do this, and I had some ideas, like how far is too far? And he was, very generous with his time and edited like the first 10,000 words. Does that sound about right? It was one chapter at that time. That chapter.
Yeah, I mean, it evolved a lot since then. My take was mainly just the historical aspects of it. Exactly. Given the leeway that obviously you don't have to be probable in fiction, right? You just have to be like believable, right? That's all you need, which is a different metric. But it evolved a lot since then too, because you have a lot of other input and so on. So yeah, so like the final book is different from what I looked at, but it's still like it hits the target of what you were trying to do. And it benefited absolutely from everybody who advised you. So
yeah. And I don't know if you would remember how often this happens to you when you're on a podcast. And I asked Robin the same thing, and she gave the same answer. It's someone will pay a super chat, right? Like $10, $20, and ask a question, and the only answer you guys can give is, we'll never know, and I'd only be speculating.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And so, John, does that happen on your show pretty regularly, or?
I mean, kind of. I mean, people will send in their questions, and sometimes their questions are either not formed well, or they're just questions that you really can't answer. And so, they pay for an answer, and it's the answer that they get.
Right. Yeah.
But I kept hearing that, thinking there's a market for this. Now I can imagine they would rather hear Dr. Carey or Dr. Walsh speculate than me, but I'm kind of first there,
I feel like though writers who aren't historians have more freedom to do that. So let's say there's like 10 different stories you could tell, and you told one of them, right? So we could have like 9 other authors, like each pick their own story to tell. Now we've got all versions of this story, and we can talk about the different versions. For me, the danger is, if I do it, then people think that I'm selling that as what happened, right? And then, and so I have to and it's a lot of work, labor to get people to decouple that, right? So that's why I always have to say, well, I don't know. I can give you some speculations, but I'm really, really averse to speculating. And a lot of historians who are good at what they're doing are like that. They're very averse to speculating, because they're exactly that problem. Once you say well, there's like a 1% chance it's this, and you go, oh well, then okay, that's 99%. I'm good. It's like, well, you said it's possible, so therefore I get to believe it. It's like, oh no, that's not what I said. But anyway, yeah, that's why like we are more limited by, we have to maintain a certain reputation for like defending the probable rather than like going just wild. But I think it's still worth doing all of these sort of speculative examinations of history, because then people can examine and compare them and talk about the different ones, and maybe even like build a new one out of pieces of the other ones, right? So yeah, it's worth doing. And I think if someone wants to, and I find this a lot, like if people who struggle with that idea, like, well, we know this much, but not what fills it in. And people like, I can't get my head around how you can just like, what do we do with just the abstract pieces and not the underlying story, right? Like people need some meat in there to like connect the dots essentially. And I think that's what fiction like yours can do. Like it help, like you don't have to go and reading your book thinking this is what happened. You can even completely adamantly agree that it is absolutely not what happened, but it allows you to like think through a scenario that would connect the dots. Like, so this actually would make sense, like how they would end up with the Gospels the way they are. Like that works as an explanation. And then, once you've situated yourself on an island of one idea, now you can start thinking, oh, well, what will be a different idea? Well, so it's useful. And I think, so it's not like this, I just don't go slagging off fiction. It's just, the problem I have with Dan Brown is like, he doesn't correctly convey historical facts. That's the thing.
Yeah, so he kind of claims it is historical fact.
Yeah, well, I mean, to what extent that's his PR, his publisher pushing that angle, to what extent is that him pushing that angle? I don't know. I haven't looked into that. But no, he would even say things like the sort of historical pieces that he would build the fiction out of also weren't true. Like, so, and that's why it really annoyed. I kind of agreed with a lot of the Christians who were annoyed by it, not because it was blasphemously exploring alternative histories. I mean, that annoyed them too. Right. I mean, if you want a better version of that, Umberto Eco's Foucault's Pendulum is like, that's a competent version of what Dan Brown was trying to do. And it came out around the same time or earlier, I think. Interesting. Yeah, Foucault's Pendulum has one of the best endings of one of those conspiracy books that you've ever seen. But it does kind of the same thing Dan Brown did, but in a different way. You just read the blurb for the book and you'll be like, oh, okay, I see what's going on here. Much better written exploration of it. But that's why I think, like, if you're going to do a thing like what you're doing, you got to at least get the little details right that would not be different, right? That would not. Like there was someone I was doing another novel that I was advising on, and they were making a mistake as to where Antioch was because they were confusing two Antiochs. And I was saying, like, this makes a huge problem for your story because you've got to fix this, right? We've got a huge chronology and distance problem and social and cultural problem. Like you've got to like pick one or do both, but then you got to revise a bunch of stuff. That kind of stuff you got to nail, right? You got to get that stuff right, and then you can build out around there. That's why I don't care too much about the modern dialogue style, because it's what the essence of the conversation is more important than the way it's being presented.
Sure.
So like that doesn't bother me historically. I don't need like you got to get the dialect exactly historically right. Like, I mean, you can do that, and if you're going to do that, then you have to meet certain metrics. But you can also just choose not to do that, and then you don't have to worry about that.
Well, then I would have had to write it. I would have had to have written it in Latin, Greek, and Aramaic. So,
well, as I think I advised, like maybe very early on, you do have the option of trying to make it sound like Apuleius or the other novels. You can get a bunch of ancient Greek novels. You can make your stories try to sound like them. But there's a reason why people don't read those novels much anymore, because the sort of wooden, strange, convoluted style, like it was great back then, like they loved it, but like now it's rough reading, right? Like it doesn't read realistically, so people struggle with it. But that's the thing, is you could do it and still do it in a modern style and still capture the essence of what would have happened in the ancient context. That's why I think why Clueless works as a retelling of Emma. Right. Is because the ideas and concepts are still there, even though the culture has completely changed, the dialogue, the way you would say things has completely changed, what jokes you could tell are completely different. But it still captures the essence of what the story was. You can do that with history too. So that's why I'm not a stickler for that. I mean, talk to an author like you about that early on, like what is your goal? But once you've picked a lane, like that's totally fine. But getting where Antioch is wrong, like that, you can't fix that. Like there's that just, unless you're just committing to, I'm just putting it in Egypt, or I'm just going to put it in Spain or whatever. And I'm just deciding that. It's like, okay, like, if that's your commitment, you're just going to like move everything around.
Right.
Then sure. Like then that's the fiction you're writing. But you do have to decide like what level of realism and accuracy do you want? And when you're telling a story like you're telling, it does matter in terms of like, regardless of the dialogue, is the way the Gospels end up the way they are, could it plausibly be because of the reasons, that the dialogue conveys? Is that a plausible storyline? And regardless of the dialogue, is it just a plausible sequence of events and reasonings and ideas? And it is, right? It is entirely plausible in context. You had other advisors who were even more close into gospel production history, even telling you the same thing. It's like, this is an entirely plausible way that this would happen.
And I mean, I took some leaps. There were two kind of literary devices or places where I would say I cheated. And one, you can confirm, my opening, when Paul is right before his conversion, he can't sleep. He's got insomnia because he was complicit in Stephen's martyrdom. Now, Acts of the Apostles is pretty much fiction, so there's no reason to believe that even happened or that Paul was there.
Because like Paul himself in Galatians says he was never in Jerusalem or even Judea until after he converted. So but like, you can just say Paul was lying, right? Like, we don't have to believe him. Like, maybe he's making that up in Galatians. It's entirely
that's I would say that's my only hole in that story.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even say that's a big hole, because you can just make it canon that Paul lied, right?
And certainly everyone knows the story of Stephen. So like, not everyone, but the people growing up the way I did, which was in a Catholic household, like, that story's familiar. The Grateful Dead wrote a song about Saint Stephen, right?
Yeah. Did you keep the Stephen killing in Jerusalem, or did you move it to Damascus? I can't remember if you relocated the geography of it.
I don't think I say where it happened.
Yeah. Well, then if that's the case, then that's even more plausible.
Yeah.
Right?
And that was as a result of because I don't know if you remember, we were going back and forth, and you were like,
about what you wanted to do about that.
Make it like a renegade mob, not the Sanhedrin, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then it could actually happen. And Paul himself says he was persecuting the church.
Oh, we lost you for a sec. Can you hear him, John? I can't.
Oh, yeah, we did lose you for a sec there, Rick, but we got you back now.
I saw that. I think I moved too much. I think my graphics card got confused there.
Okay.
Did the audio drop too?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just for a second.
Okay. Yeah. But anyways, so it's plausible, because maybe that really happened in Damascus or Arabia or something, right? But then the same sequence of events would transpire that you novelize. So
let me tell you how I handled that. I pursue, right? Because it's vague, right? In Latin, in Greek, it's pursue. In my story, Paul and he has a traveling companion named Ezra that I created. And they're recalling how they ran into two of these crazy guys from the way, Andrew, and I just picked two of the apostles. And, one of them said that the prophets were wrong, and Paul lost it because they were never wrong. We might have misinterpreted them, but the prophets were never wrong. And he throws the guy out of the synagogue. And when he does, he loses a scroll, and his assistant picks up the scroll, and it turns out it's the Ascension of Isaiah. And then Paul reads that, and he hasn't slept in 2 weeks. And the next day he falls off his horse and has, sees the light. So it was kind of this subconscious. And so part of that, you wrote about sort of schizophrenia in
schizotypality, which is schizophrenia is when it becomes a disorder, but when you're in between what's called neurotypical, and then between that and schizophrenic, which is a disorder because you have difficulty living your life, etc. In between is schizotypality. There's schizotypal, where you're completely functional, but you hallucinate regularly, and it just integrates into your life. And we have a lot of science on this,
Right.
that in non-Western cultures, being schizotypal was an advantage, because it actually sort of, people elevated you to shamanic status, right? Like, oh, he talks to the gods, he sees spirits, etc. Like, that makes him important. We want to listen to this guy. So you can actually gain, social status and influence and power by being schizotypal, and that's still the case in non-Western cultures today. So there's like some of the fringe churches in Brazil, for instance, where this is a way to be upward mobile, is to be one of these sort of schizotypal people. That's how you become like a really popular minister that people really think is holy, etc. It's just in like rationalist Western context that gets denigrated, and medicalized, essentially. And so, but that's actually weird, because we are weirdos. WEIRD.
Right.
So people can Google that and see, like, Westerners are strange. Ethnographically, we're just bizarre, and we're new. Like, so the whole concept of our culture, we take things for granted as that's the human norm, but actually we're weirdos. The human norm is very different, right? And especially if you go back in time, it's very different. I think it's important for people to understand that, because you can't understand the origins of Christianity if you don't understand that it's a different world. The cultural assumptions, the way people thought, is very different.
Go
ahead, John.
Well, yeah, I was going to say that a lot of times when people hear me talk about how, these are just hallucinations, auditory and visual hallucinations that Paul is having, or that the other apostles are having, and they'll normally push back and be like, oh, so he was just crazy? And it's like, no, you've got to reorient yourself to how they perceived it, because it's not like they had this complex sort of view of mental health at that time. Like, if you were having visions, they didn't think that you were crazy. They thought that you were specially touched by the gods. And so you were receiving that kind of special information.
They would only think you were crazy if you're having visions so much that you couldn't even like eat or something, right? Like it was literally like crippling,
debilitating.
And so they had the concept of that, but you had to be really like eating grass crazy, which is, and I think that the tendency in the West, like our Western attitudes towards mental illness, is very negative in general. So that we have this idea that the whole concept of saying, well, you think they're just crazy, like that whole line of reasoning is very Western. Like, it's like, oh, so you immediately go to crazy, right? Like that's like the Western mindset. Yeah, that's an example of how we denigrate schizotypals as crazy, but that wasn't how other cultures would react to them. And so, it's hard for people to like understand that. They think like calling Paul schizotypal is an ad hominem or something.
Right.
No, it's an anthropological explanation of what happened.
So it's plausible that the way I depicted, Paul has his conversion, and then he goes to Arabia, and he's basically speaking in tongues, gathering a roster of believers and collecting money before he ever goes to meet Peter and James, because he wants to show up with some money. Hey, I was persecuting or pursuing you guys, but now I'm with you. And they're like, how the hell did he have the same dreams we had? He must be one of us. But they send him off to like Galatia. They're like, we'll never hear from him again. Let him spin his wheels with the Gentiles. And then 14 years later, it's like, son of a bitch, he's kicking ass. Now what do we do?
Right.
I have like a whole thing at his apostolic council where, he comes in and he's sent other of his emissaries with the money because he didn't want to get robbed on the way back.
Yeah.
And he's there with Barnabas, and this guy's got all this money, and they're like, holy shit, what do we do? We can't let them in because they're not Torah observant. And he basically, all right, I'll bring all the money back then. And they're like, wait, let's talk to the Holy Spirit. And then I actually have them speaking in tongues.
It's fun. I actually was gratified to see someone really playing off of that, because that thing about money is all over the letters. Like, a lot of people like think you're just insulting Paul or making shit up. It's like, no, it's like Paul is accused of graft so many times in the letters. Like almost all of his letters include some of him defending himself against accusations of graft, where he's bringing sacks of cash back to the quote unquote saints in Jerusalem, meaning, Peter and James and John, right? Like the head of the, the sort of top dudes. So he's definitely sending in bags of cash, and that can't, like, there's no way they're just ignoring that. Like, oh, no, very generous. It's like,
Yeah,
no, of course that buys you something, right? Like that,
Right.
and that, especially in like ancient Roman, like client patron culture, where the idea, like, yeah, you owe something for that, right? Like he's buying in. It wasn't like the capitalist idea of, oh, well, he's buying in, like it's a, like, I don't know, it's a different attitude. Like buying in is more like the great man concept, where like you actually are buying influence, like legitimately, like that's how you would do it. And it's like your way you're showing that you're serious, essentially. And then of
Sure.
course, yeah, but then they're like, but we're getting a lot of cash, so maybe we can find a way to like come up with a compromise.
Exactly.
And that's where you get like the Council of Jerusalem. But yeah, there's a lot of passages that talk about this. So it is definitely, that's not made up. That's actually
Yeah,
there.
so
There's
in
a
one
lot
of
of
my-
room for fiction to explore that. Yeah.
In one of my debates between Lucia and Luke, 100 years later, I can't remember off the top of my head what they're arguing about, but he wins the argument and she's like, you're right. Yeah. And then, of course, when I come, make sure you've collected all the money, like, so she kind of throws that back at him. And that's right out of whichever letter, So
yeah.
this was the other. I said I had sort of two literary devices. The first one was that Paul was complicit in Stephen's stoning, if that even happened. We don't know. But the other one was, Lucia, and I had to do this to get the debate that won't happen between you and the mainstream scholars, right? Where Lucia represents you and Luke represents the mainstream, but he's been contracted to write this gospel because Mark and Matthew have already been written. But this bishop and the presbyter, Bartholomew, John, they find Luke works for a guy named Caius who's like a scribe. He's hired just to copy, but then because he's Paideia trained, they're gonna, if he does a good job on copying, this whatever document, they're gonna hire him to do this gospel. And so he asked for the Septuagint, and they have the letters from Paul. He has the Odyssey and the Aeneid and the Iliad, and he has the first Matthew's Gospel and Mark. So they're reading all of this, and then they craft Luke's Gospel. And so there's a lot of back and forth where, she pulls out the story of Jesus ben Ananias. And like I just took from your book, the 20, similarities.
Right out of Josephus. Yeah.
Exactly. And she's like, lays it down in front of Luke, and like, you're telling me he didn't know, like, and Luke's like, he can't really argue, so there's a lot of that kind of stuff. I don't want to give away too much. I want people to buy the book.
Yeah.
But like,
the point of it is filling in the meat of what would be the thinking, the politics, how would that happen, and what would they, and like you said, like they would just understand this because they know that's how authors worked. That's how you built things back then. It's very different from how people construct things today, but back then it was normal to do this. So, and I think that's a lot of people have a hard time getting their head around. So having people literally talk about it and do it is a good way for people to like get into their mind. Oh, now I understand what you're talking about, how this works and so on. Whereas, I'm always talking this sort of abstract, whereas here you're showing them doing it. And that can be like one way to come to the same conclusion, the same understanding. By the way, I want to let everybody know I've got a gigantic bottle of Tin Cup.
Holy cow.
And, Colorado.
I hope you're not planning on finishing that during this.
No. Good Lord, no.
I've got Jack Daniels bonded downstairs waiting for me after the show today, but
nice.
I had to go a little bit cheaper route this time as far as because of the furlough and everything. But so we've been talking a lot about how this book is kind of challenging pre-existing ideas about how the Jesus story came about. I feel like in the mainstream, like there's a very easy story that we've all been taught through the years that we've all become accustomed to, and that seems like the most reasonable and logical way that Christianity would have developed. But Peter, your book is kind of challenging that paradigm, and we kind of talked about the aspect of the paradigm being challenged here. And I'm just kind of curious, like in the context of Christian origins, like what do you mean? What would you mean by paradigm? Like what kind of paradigm are you challenging, and like how are you hoping to challenge this paradigm, like with a fictional story as opposed to like some kind of like a historical text, like something like what Rick would write?
Right. Yeah. So that's a interesting, and this is obviously what I wrestled with for 2.5 years. I didn't know. I mean, I've heard the word paradigm, but I didn't really kind of understand. So, Richard, what would you say? Like, is paradigm kind of a synonym almost for like bias or a context? And then you kind of.
Yeah. I mean, it can produce a bias.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, a paradigm is just, there's just a way that you like the underlying structure of a thing. That's your paradigm, and it can be very difficult. Like once you hang all the flesh on those bones, it'd be very difficult for you to understand how that flesh could be hung on a different set of bones, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the main, like in terms of this, like John was talking about the paradigm that's the mainstream paradigm, which is, oh, Jesus did some, like he was very charismatic and persuaded some people of something, and then they just, when he died, they sort of went crazy and decided that he was now God or whatever, a demigod, an angel, whatever. And then went around preaching the good news. And then someone decided to write stories, but there were all these oral lore, and they sat down at the fire, and all these people who knew Jesus came and, or who knew the people who knew Jesus, and said, well, here's a story I heard, or here's a story I heard. And there's this like oral lore. And then they wrote this oral lore down diligently. And so that the Gospels are kind of like just a slightly distorted biography, right? Like it's just that it's kind of a true story. Yeah, some stuff's been exaggerated. Characters have been been merged together or whatever, right? Like the way they talk about like fiction that's supposed to be based on history. Yeah, we've changed some things. Like U-571. Yeah, it was really the British, but we're gonna be like totally pro-American and like completely steal the glory of the British who captured the German submarine and the Enigma device and just claim it was Americans who did it.
So like revisionist history.
Yeah. But it's history. It's true. It really happened. It's just, we've just played a little bit with it. So the idea is like that's the mainstream idea, is that there was really a true story and it just got distorted over time. And the gospel authors are just diligently recording the oral lore that they came to them and so forth. And if you understand it that way, that's how you start to read the gospels into Paul. You say, like, when he's saying one thing or another, you say, oh, he's talking about what the gospels talk about. Like when he talks about Jesus appeared. Oh, like the gospels, when they say he showed up and had dinner with them. That's what Paul's talking about. So you get this like this paradigm, this one way of seeing things. One example I'll use is in my work is James, the brother of the Lord. The paradigm is that you read the brothers of the Lord as being biological brothers, but it can be really hard for you to like flip on that and realize, actually, there's only one kind of brother of the Lord Paul ever talks about, and that's mythic, like cultic brothers of the Lord. So why would you think that but if you're stuck in the ruts of thinking like, well, obviously it's the brothers of Jesus because of the gospels, right? Like you can't get out of that thinking and like re-look at the text and realize that's Paul never says that, right? Like, and so you think like, but he talks about these like baptized Christians. What if he just means Christian? And that completely changes how you read the text. Because when you look at like 1 Corinthians 9 or Galatians 1, when you understand that he's just talking about Christians who are the non-apostolic Christians in particular, your understanding of what he's saying completely changes. But you have to switch that paradigm. You have to be able to see it a different way. When you can see it the different way, you totally get it. You're like, oh man, that's way more obviously the case. But if you're stuck seeing it the other way, you can't see it the other way, right? Like, so you can't flip to the other side. That's why you don't get it. And that's why you have like the paradigms. You're stuck on a paradigm. It can create a bias where you're not willing to question the paradigm, so you don't see the other way.
Yeah. So John, show, if you don't mind, the blue dress and the mother-in-law. So I think most people will recognize this. This went viral about 10 years ago, where some percentage of people see a blue dress and some percentage of people see gold. And it's just kind of an illusion of, you know this, Richard, right? How would you explain this? It's
I don't know the whole story behind the dress in terms of what actually is going on in the brain, but it is an idea of the contrast and shading. Our brain constructs the understanding of color through interpretation of shading and juxtaposition, so that our brain literally will invent colors that aren't there. And so you can do a thing like you can actually go and look at what actual code is that pixel right there. You could look, you could like come up with a pixel map and say, well, that doesn't make sense. That's not what my brain is seeing.
Yeah.
But you know objectively what frequency of photon is coming off of that pixel on the screen, because you can literally, that's an objective fact that you can, if you know how to tech it, you can get to see what the pixel code is, but your brain isn't seeing that. And so they're like, okay, what's going on? And so what it is, it's this idea that your brain is doing an interpretation. And once it's on that one side of interpretation, you can't get to the other.
It's so hard to see. And the same thing is true of the picture on the right, where a lot of people see an old woman and other people see a young, beautiful woman turned beyond a profile. So the young woman's cheekbone and chin are the old woman's nose. And a lot of people, they can't see it. And then once it's pointed out, then they can't see the original one.
Right.
And so I never would have used the word paradigm, but that's pretty much.
It's a good illustration. Yeah.
And so if you wouldn't mind going to the next thing, John, which is the timeline. So both sides of the historicist, mythicist debate would agree on these, we'll call them objective facts. Is it fair to say?
What's that?
That like the historicists.
Oh, what you've got here. Yeah, right.
We'll all agree. Yeah, Jesus was born somewhere between 6 and 4 BC because whoever was the governor when they did the census, blah, blah, blah. Quirinius or somebody, right?
Well, that would be 6 AD. So that creates a problem right away.
Okay, well.
It's a 10-year discrepancy between Matthew and Luke on that.
Yeah. I was gonna say, as far as the book goes, considering that your book there, Peter, has Luke crafting it, Luke is going to be the one that places him in the 6 AD. So, like, as far as where the book is in the 2nd century, I mean, I think this would be.
Notice that's assuming Luke got the dates right? Because Luke could have just messed up. Like, Luke might think Quirinus was there in 4 BC. Like, he just doesn't realize the chronology is wrong. So Luke might be agreeing with Matthew. It's Luke that's making the mistake. Like, that's the easiest solve for that, right? Like, Christians can't allow a gospel author to have made a mistake. That's why it creates this problem, or now they have to somehow and get the mistake to go away. But or you could just say it was a mistake and then that's it. Like, that's enough, right?
And it sounds like that now the Paul's, like, there's people saying that Paul was an invention of Roman somebody, or like Marcion.
There are there are like mainstream peer-reviewed studies, multiple independent studies now coming out. We've got Nina Livesey and Marcus Vincent writing with major academic presses, arguing that probably Paul and certainly his letters from this is their thesis, are all 2nd century forgeries, that they don't. The gospel in the Gospels, or at least one of the Gospels, co-originates or precedes them, right? So like, and so that's an Acts too. That's the other thing, is like they move the date of Acts around it. So they're questioning the chronology and coming up with these alternatives that used to be considered fringe, like how no serious scholar would propose this. I don't agree with them, but I do think that they're like making good points in terms of like, well, you can like if you rethink the chronology, like you can make all the pieces fit together and look, like I can come up with a different theory that wildly contradicts the assumptions of the mainstream paradigm. So yeah, they're paradigm challenging studies too, right? Exactly. And so, but yeah, that happened just like just recently, like the last couple years. That has, like, while you were writing your book, these studies were coming out. So So yeah.
And then if you go to the next screen, John, this is the creed that everybody would recognize. But if you're seeing the blue dress or the young woman, you're going to read this and say, oh, yeah, Paul's talking about, Jesus dying and then blah, blah, blah. But if you see the gold dress or the old woman, which I'm going to sort of equate to the mythicist, it seems pretty clear that in Paul's mind, Jesus didn't appear to anyone until after he resurrected.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But if you can, no one's lying here, right? No one's trying to pull the wool over. They just look at it from that paradigm.
That's right.
And they say, of course, that confirms what I always knew. But if you look at it from the mythicist paradigm, it's pretty obvious that, and he doesn't say, Peter told me he saw it happen. He says, according to scripture,
Right.
Yeah.
So that isn't evidence that it was all fabricated, but it's certainly not evidence that he was historical either.
Right. Yeah. That's a good example of this paradigm distinction. Is like, yeah, you can read into here two different theories of what Paul's describing, because he really does not mention anyone ever seeing Jesus until after he's dead. Right. Like, if we just read the text as is, there is no Jesus before that. Right. Or at least no one met him or anything like that. Yeah. So you really do have to import it. This becomes kind of like an ad hoc supposition that historicists sort of have to complicate their theory to sort of, well, Paul's just sort of skipping over it. And apparently the entire Christian creed is skipping over the entire ministry of Jesus for some reason. Right. So, but yeah, right. And so that's, and that changes 100 years later. Then you have Ignatius saying that the creed is, you have to swear that he really was born to Mary. And, it's like, now you got to get that. And he really was crucified by Pontius Pilate specifically. And he really did have dinner with people. And if not, you have to be expelled from the church, which, he's talking about fellow Christians, which means there were Christians doubting, saying this stuff wasn't true. Like, Jesus didn't have dinner in front of witnesses. That never happened. And so, so you have these two paradigms of how you understand things. And you get to that question of like, what do you do? And then, so you're exploring one fictional model of how that could have happened.
And so you can take that off now, John. But thank you. The other thing I thought would be worth kind of kicking around is the four levels of the faith. So faith, gnosis, knowledge, love, and inheritance. And so in my story, Luke and Lucia are composing the gospel, and they realize they're not inside, that they're trying to make sense of, like, when Paul's saying, you're not mature enough, I had to feed you milk. And then when he delivers the gospel, the bishop and the presbyter are like, son of a gun, this guy's in. He knows. So they invite him in, and then he finds out the truth that it all happened in the celestial realm. And he's devastated because he bought it, right? And now he already took an oath of fealty, right? So that's what they do. It's like the Scientologists, right? They get you in.
Right. Yeah.
And you find out that, what is it named? Xenon or something?
Right.
Xenu.
Yeah.
It's like, are you shitting me? But
that wasn't in Dianetics. I didn't see that in there.
Yeah. So I heard you talking about like Gnosticism and Docetism. Like, would the four levels have been a part of that, do you think?
So for people to know, I assume you're referring to Clement of Alexandria.
Correct.
On the historicity of Jesus. He talks about these levels of sort of initiation in the church, which means even in the early 3rd century, they still had these levels, right? Which mean, and when he talks about, I think faith is at the bottom, right? Is that
Yes, that's the first one.
Right. And that tells you something interesting, because around the same time, Origen is writing, and he's the one that like let slip in the middle of one of his long, boring treatises that, well, we want the masses to believe things literally, but we, the sort of educated, know that it's not literal. Like, you're supposed to understand it allegorically, but we can't tell the poor people that, because if we do, they won't believe it, and then they'll be damned and they'll burn in hell, and that would be terrible. So what we got to do is we got to convince them it's all literally true, because we don't have time to educate them before they die or whatever. It's like, there's no time. We got to get them to believe now. but it's okay. It's completely okay to do that, because when they're dead and they're in heaven, then we've got endless time to educate them and explain to them what it really was, right? So like, it's a very sort of elitist, patronizing, very opiate of the masses kind of attitude. It's very Straussian, actually. It's like modern neoconservative concept of religion, but it really comes out of Plato. So this is Plato's
Right.
Republic. It's just funny that people don't realize that Plato's Republic was the first manual of fascism. Like, it was the first philosophy of fascism ever developed. And it's based on this concept, which is that you have to have the guardians, this sort of specially selected top elite, that have to guard the myths and make sure nobody changes the myths, nobody doubts the myths or anything like that. But they'll know that the myths are all bogus. They're just meant to get people to be good. Like in Plato's model, it's how do you get people to behave? Well, you tell them a story. The story won't be true, but they have to believe it. And so you have to have this organization that makes sure and therefore he has to punish heretics, has to have a hierarchy that controls who knows what, and maintains the sort of strictness of the myths and so on. If people are wondering, like, doesn't this sound exactly like the Vatican? And it's like, yes. They built in the 4th century, the Vatican whole structure was built out of Plato's Republic. It's fucking right out of the textbook. Like, it really is.
Yeah.
They just chose their own myths. They said our myths are better. They're the good myths, because that was a part of Plato's thing too, is good myths and bad myths. And the good myths are the ones that make people behave. And you see that in, like, even Justin's, like, before Clement, you've got people talking about how, yeah, like when it wasn't Justin, there's a particular author around Justin's time who says that if you take the most hardened scoundrel and teach him the gospel, he'll just become as sweet and docile as a sheep, right? So it's like the gospel has this power to make people good, and therefore it's the most powerful myth. Therefore, it's the one that has to be protected. But then you have these levels of understanding of that, right? It's like,
Right.
are you the guardian who knows the whole scheme, or are you at the bottom who just has to have faith? Right? Like, where are you in this hierarchy? And so that's, you play with this idea of levels, and as you level up, you learn more. And of course, this gets preserved in Freemasonry and well, Scientology replicates it. I'm sure it's structurally in the Vatican, right? Like,
well, wasn't Clement comparing it to the Osiris cult? Like, that's how they were.
He didn't, not explicitly, but he does like alludes to the mystery religions having the same doctrine, that this is an ancient way of doing it. But yeah, he's very much doesn't want people to think that he's selling another mystery religion, even if that's what he's doing. He can't give away the game, so he's trying to, like, sell it as its own magical special thing, and so he talks about it in terms of what rank you'll have in heaven when you get there, right? So so he's telling it, like, in terms of what your carrot is.
So when they're telling them, like, moving from faith into knowledge, it's not like, oh no, it's not like it didn't happen. It's just that it didn't happen here. It happened up there.
Right. Yeah.
So it's still the cosmic truth. It's just, so I was going to ask you, John, when I made reference to the fact that you had a conversation with a guy about syncretism, and the guy said, you might get popped in the face. Like, I don't think that it's necessarily consciously deceptive. They just believe it themselves. Do you follow?
Yeah. And that's actually what I was actually I was going to ask about is like how likely do either of you guys think that, in the 1st century when they were developing this, new basically sect of Judaism, that they, that there would have been like a lot of adversity, like, to the syncretism? Because I mean, I when I think about it, it's like, well, Philo of Alexandria was busy doing it. He was already making that kind of, I don't know if he would have been considered mainstream in his efforts to do it, but it kind of seems like there might be some people that are offended, but as far as, like, being violently offended, I'm just not sure.
Yeah, because there was always ways to, like, defend it, right? So, which is still the case now, right? Like, how Christianity is defended, where there's like the common person believes that you're supposed to be good or you go to hell. But if you try to, like, bring that into a philosophical discussion with, like, a PhD evangelical, they'll be chilled. No, that's a naive way of understanding it. It's like, yeah, but you're still not explaining it to them. You're just letting them go on believing this, like, they go to hell if they aren't good thing. But you're saying that it's really a much more complicated, sophisticated, yada yada. But but only you get to believe that. Like the common person, it's too much work to get them to believe the correct thing. So you want them to believe the incorrect thing. And it's okay because you'll get to explain it to them in heaven, right? Like it's origin, right? Like all over again. So it's like, even when it is lying, it's sincere lying. Like they really do believe, at least some of them really do believe. Like some of them are just doing it for money. Let's just be honest. Money, prestige, power. Like there are like, superficial trappings that engross people. But some people genuinely believe this. And then when you have someone come along who really believes it, and I ran into this. So like I debated. Coming up in November, I'm going to be debating. You can check it on the website. I'm going to be debating someone who's
Andrew Wilson. Yeah.
I
was going to go to that, and I can't.
So I'll be defending secular humanism, which is better for society, secular humanism or Christianity. In a sense, like he defends a kind of like atheist Christianity, a Straussian view, where like it doesn't matter whether it's true. It just matters that people are better when they're Christian, right? So we need Christianity. It's that kind of. There are various people will recognize this sort of neocon aspect. There's some.
So he's almost taken the Plato's Republic.
Yeah, I don't know if that's the position he'll take in the debate, right? Like we'll find out. Like he's very disingenuous, so he's like William Lane Craig. He'll change his position based on what he thinks will win it.
Gotcha.
Yeah, Rick, did oh, sorry, go ahead, Rick.
I was going to tell a story, but if you wanted to like me to qualify something or something.
Oh no, I was just going to ask you real quick. Did I ever send you that? It's like an 8-hour debate between a friend of mine and Andrew Wilson. I can't remember if I sent that to you.
I think you did.
Okay.
It can't hurt to send it to me again, just in case if I lost track of it or something.
All right. Yeah, I couldn't remember because I will not. I'm glad that you're going to debate him, but I will not.
And I'm going to go in eyes open. I know what I know what's happening. I'm not going in thinking he's not going to be a disingenuous, bad faith operator. I know he's a disingenuous, bad faith operator. But here's the thing. This is what gets to my point. Is years ago I did the same debate with Joel McDermott, and Joel McDermott was a true believer. So the interesting thing, what I found is when I was prepping for that debate, right? I was researching like what had he done before and arguments and stuff. And I was surprised. There are many examples where he was arguing against his own side, like his own conservative peers. And I'll pick one example was immigration, where he had this elaborate, extremely well researched and argued position that Jesus said you should be welcoming to the immigrant, right? Like refugees, you should be all over that. Like that's what Jesus said. I don't understand why you're all anti-immigrant, that's antichrist. That's opposite, right? So so he was actually taking this position and his peers were not happy that he was taking this position. So he was willing to take hits to defend and what obviously was true from his point of view. So he drank the Kool-Aid and it made him behave in a way that the elite didn't want. Like they lost control of their monster, right?
Yeah, right.
Because he genuinely believed this stuff. And so that can happen too, right? Where it starts from this bad faith position where it's quote unquote good faith, bad faith position where you think you got to opiate the masses, you got to drug the masses or else they won't behave. And so you have to get them to believe this stupid stuff, even though we elites know better, yada, yada. You can still be from this position. I always wonder if William Lane Craig is one of these guys where he thinks we have to convince people that this is true or else there'll be rape camps and skeet shooting of kittens, right? He thinks society will dissolve. If he sincerely thinks that society will dissolve if people don't believe in the literal resurrection of Jesus, then that would explain everything he does. Everything he does is about psychological manipulation to get people to believe in the literal resurrection of Jesus because maybe he thinks that that's just better for society, even if he himself is I don't know if that really happened. I don't really care. Right? It's not relevant.
The noble lie.
So, yeah, exactly. That's right. The noble lie. Eusebius gives an explicit defense of it, citing the Republic of Plato, by the way. Citing the works of Plato. But that there's different, and I think there's different operators. Some are just pursuing money and glory, and some really do think that this is the way to fix society. And then you have Joel McDermott's that really believe it, and that's kind of your Luke guys. He really believed it, and then he was kind of disappointed to find out the higher level of understanding is not what he was told going in. But anyway, this is all real, and we have real texts attesting to this being a way of thinking even then, and obviously still today. So there's all these different ways of looking at the way, like the point of religion from within. Even the religious people themselves are doing this. It's not outsiders being cynical. It's the religious insiders like occasionally slipping and telling us the truth.
Yeah, right.
Doing, right. Yeah. So and anyway, yeah. And so I think like your book captures that sense as well, which is kind of important when you relate it back to like the crimes of the church, where this all this effort to cover it up rather than just admit that that's bad and do something about it. Right.
Right.
And so it's the same attitude. That's the failure mode of this sort of Straussian view of how to control society. Anyway, so that's, yes, the guardians have to be protected at all costs, even if they become like mass murdering, genocidal child rapists. Like, it's like, no, they can't be true because we need the guardians, or the society will dissolve. And so that's that sort of attitude, I think, it's important to see how this relates to this way of thinking.
Mm.
Now, so there have been some historicists out there, like Dennis MacDonald, who claims that mythicists are intellectually bankrupt. I'm just kind of curious, Peter, do you think that, your fictional story here proposing an alternative timeline or at least an alternative idea of how Christianity could have developed, do you hope that is kind of like the paradigm or this bias that you hope to overturn with this alternative view?
100%. I just recently watched Nicholas Peter Lay Allen. You familiar with him? You list him as one of the guys on Richard, you list him as one of the guys who's a mythicist, basically, right?
You're Nicholas, right? So NP Allen.
Yeah. And he, like Jacob Berman just released like a 6-hour thing, but it's a collection of several interviews apparently. But he wrote a book and he said, I naively thought I might get people to behave better, And I thought, gee, that's kind of how I felt going into my book. Maybe I'll get people to at least think instead of just believe what's been, they've been indoctrinated into. But the idea of being intellectually bankrupt, that really bothered me because I swear, and I could be confusing. Did I not see you and him on where you went through the Greek? Like you had a Greek on your computer. It was a Zoom meeting like this. And
we did some shots where we were in the room together.
There was that too.
Yeah. Actually, I stayed at a cabin. It was McDonald's cabin with Derek, the host of Myth Vision, and we just spent like the whole weekend. I don't know how many days filming. So sometimes it was just me, sometimes just him, sometimes it was us together, including us looking over the Greek text and arguing over his Q plus theory in interpreting the thing. So there that could be there, but there could be other. I've done so many over the years. So.
I thought there was one where you were on opposite, just like this, 3 windows with whoever the host was.
I just don't remember when that was.
But you had the Greek. Now, I wasn't looking at the Greek, right? But then subsequently, you did one with James Valiant on History Valley, and they showed the whole thing. And at the very last line of the thing, it says, and Agrippa made Jesus ben Damnius the high priest. And I'm like, how are we arguing about this for 100 years when it's so obvious that the Jesus they're talking about is Jesus ben Damnius?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Like, am I fucking
this
crazy?
Is a story. This is the story explaining why he became the high priest. Like, why else is he there? It's not a random. Yeah, I agree. But that's a paradigm thing, right? Like, if you're just sold on this being about James, like McDonald is, he's sold about this being about James, and he's seeing it in a weirdly, completely.
But you showed him in the so how?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about now. We did a debate on this. I have a post game with links to the video that you're talking about on my blog, and it's just look for McDonald. Just search his name on my blog. You'll find we did a debate recently, like 3 years ago, I'm guessing ish, on interpreting the passage, interpreting Josephus. So it's like McDonald and Josephus. You'll find it in my blog where I give my post game analysis, but you don't have to like trust my word for anything. The links are there so you can go and look and watch and see what his arguments are and so on and compare. But that's a perfect example of paradigm thinking where he's so stuck on the paradigm that he's literally misinterpreting Josephus because he's trying to import all this stuff into Josephus that isn't there.
So
Thus
who's
ignoring all the clues.
intellectually bankrupt
Yeah.
when you are shown the evidence
Yeah.
and then
I don't. Yeah, I mean, it's worth pointing out that that's just a dumb ad hominem thing to say. Really, it doesn't make him intellectually bankrupt. He's just wrong, right? Like this, like being just wrong because of this paradigmatic thinking. Like you're stuck in a paradigm. That's not intellectually bankrupt. It's just erroneous, right? Like this, and anybody can be stuck in that error, and anybody can get out of that error. Like it's not an indictment of your whole, like whether you're intellectually bankrupt or not, right?
But then how can he throw that accusation at you?
Yeah, it's the low blow. Yeah, right. Yeah, it's completely inappropriate.
I guess that's I took offense to that. To answer your question, John,
Yeah. No, and I feel like in our previous live stream that I did with you, Carrier, on the Did Jesus Really Exist course that Ehrman is either going to be releasing soon, or I don't know if he's already released it, like for it being publicly accessible or whatever.
Yeah.
But one of the things I identified was this, starting with a certain kind of paradigm. I called it Ehrman's circle because he starts off with the assumption that Jesus existed as a historical person, and then he proceeds to interpret all information through that lens.
Right.
And it seems to be the same way here with McDonald, and that's why he calls it intellectually bankrupt, because you're not starting off with his, presumption that, like Jesus actually did exist and he had a brother named James. And then, once you start off with that, the Josephine, the minor testimonium or whatever, that it only makes sense if you start off from that assumption. And it's like, that's just not the case. And so it makes the whole intellectually bankrupt thing just seem like a frivolous rhetorical device rather than a serious accusation or whatever.
Yeah. And he did accept you from that, by the way. He said, I've had drinks with Carrier and he's a good guy, whatever. But the rest of you who aren't PhDs, you're all intellectually bankrupt, I guess.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, I'm not sure what intellectually bankrupt means.
That's also a valid point. It's like, what does that mean exactly? Yeah.
And I'll have conversations with people where they'll essentially claim the same thing about being intellectually bankrupt. And then, I don't know Koine Greek or any of the, I've not been classically trained as a historian or anything. I've just read a lot of shit kind of autodidactically. Yeah. And I'll go through and I'll be like, look, if you actually look at the Greek and you define the words and you see how these words are defined and then how Paul uses these words, and or like in the case of Paul or Josephus or anything like that, like how does he use these words or whatever, like I'll explain it all the way down and they still end up with, yeah, you're just still intellectually bankrupt. Like it literally does not matter how intellectual you get, they still come away with, because you don't agree with them, you're obviously intellectually an idiot.
Yeah. All right, so I'm going to amplify that with, I don't know if you remember, Richard, our first conversation, I said, this is the extent of my math knowledge. The whole Bayesian thing is what it is, and I'm not disagreeing with you, but the way I look at it, and I said this to you, at our first meeting, it seems to me, based on that slide we showed about, like, everyone agrees this or this, 1 and 1 is 2, obviously, 2 and 1 is 3, duh. 3 and 1 is 4, but if you think 4 and 1 is 5, you're fucking crazy. Right? And you said, that's pretty much it. So that's where this intellectual bankruptcy occurs. I guess.
Yeah.
Which I'm kind of.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to ask. I'm kind of curious, Peter. How did you work in or did you work in at all any of the math or the Bayesian reasoning or anything like that into dying for the faith?
Not at all. Not at all.
Okay.
Yeah, and that wouldn't make sense because that's a historian's analysis of data where he's writing an in-person story, right? It's like Bayes' theorem didn't exist in 112 AD, so they're not going to do it. And the people at the campfire aren't going to know Bayes' theorem, so that's not going to come up there either. There's no occasion for it to come up in that. For me, it's a tool of historical analysis.
Yeah, well, I guess as far as like appealing to Bayes or bringing up Bayes whenever you're trying to do this paradigm shift with people, do you think that it helps or hurts the conversation to sort of broach that topic.
It's like the levels. You've got faith, and then you've got knowledge. Except I'm upfront about that. Like I'll say, it's easier to just not mention it until people need it, right? Like you got it because there is the milk of just using plain language. But when people want to go that level deeper, when they start asking questions like, well, what do you mean when you say probable? And why do you say it's probable? Like, how do you get that? It's like, oh, now you're you're at the next level. You're now asking those questions. Those are great questions to ask, and you really should be asking them. Well, then let me walk you through that story. Like, how do we come up with these things? What do we mean when we say probable or very probable or improbable, etc.?
More or less.
And why do we mean that? And how do we get that? Like, are we just making it up? Just pulling it out of our ass, full ham sandwich? Or is there some sort of reasoning there? And, the truth is like all valid historical reasoning is Bayesian already. Like all of it, every true, correct, sound argument in history is Bayesian. So the only difference is whether you know that or not. And so a lot of historians don't realize that their reasoning, that the way they argue is already Bayesian. If they did know that, then they'd be able to like catch themselves making mistakes more often. They'd be able to like shore up their arguments better because they would know like, oh, so all my estimates are really a frequency of something. So the data I'm looking for is like relative frequencies of things. It's like if you understand what you're looking for, and I talk about this obviously in Proving History, which is the first book about the method. But I also talk about it more in the new book I just came out with, which is The Obsolete Paradigm of a Historical Jesus, which updates everyone on what's happened in the last 10 years since my peer-reviewed study came out. And I have a chapter on the math part of it because how people reacted to the math in the intervening 10 years is interesting in a lot of ways. Like some people just like, they're like Luke Skywalker clinging to the thing saying, no, that's impossible. And then some people are like, I just don't understand it. Like I get there's something important there. And then some people just misuse it. Right. But then some people use it correctly. And so it's interesting to see the difference between those different groups of people. And I wrote chapter 5 of Obsolete Paradigm for all the groups. Really, chapter 6 is for the people who already get it, but want to see why it leads to the conclusions that I do. And in particular, interacting with the work of Camille Gregor, who's done some because he understands Bayesian reasoning and actually does, like he's doing the kinds of things that you're supposed to do if you're going to challenge a Bayesian argument. And so like I devote half of chapter 6 to that approach, which is like the correct sort of intelligent, I should say informed approach, like someone who understands what's going on conceptually with the math and therefore knows what to challenge, like what it is I'm arguing, rather than trying to weasel out of the argument, which is a completely different reaction. And chapter 5 is kind of based on the idea of like you can't look at this and your eyes glaze over and say, well, that's too hard. I'm not going to involve myself. It's like, well, if you're a historian, you really do need to involve yourself in this. Like you need to know this in the same way that you need to know how to read ancient Greek, which is also really hard and requires a lot of study. You absolutely could master this. This is way easier than ancient Greek, Bayes' theorem. And it's a necessary tool. And I explain and show there why it's necessary to everything historians do. And they're already doing it. It's just, they're just not aware that they're doing it. And so they can't really pop the hood and make sure that all the parts are there and are working correctly the way they ought to do. And then it also hampers their ability to make arguments against each other towards a correct result rather than arguing against each other just to win the argument. Yeah. These are different goals, right? Like, I got to defend my position is a different goal than what actually is the correct position and how do we know that?
Yeah.
And the I got to defend my position no matter what results in a different set of skills and methods that really have nothing to do with what's true, but more about how you can convince yourself and other people that it's true, which is a different tactic. But then the other thing is like, well, how do we really know that? Well, then you pop the hood and look in and, oh, look, Bayes' theorem is there. Oh, shit, I better know how this machine works. And then you can actually do it correctly. And so and I think this is important. And here's the other thing. So like in Obsolete Paradigm, in the intervening 10 years, a lot of historians have gone on board on this. Like some even explicitly cite my work saying like, yeah, we really need to go Bayesian, including in biblical studies, but in other fields as well. And so I actually cite the bibliography of historians who are saying, yeah, Bayes is where it's at. Here's some examples of how to do it, and are doing it more in biblical studies. Now, they're not like the mainstream, because the mainstream is screaming, howling against the void. They're the Luke Skywalker saying, no, that's impossible. But there's a creeping number, and they're usually the younger scholars, right? And, you know, so I think it will grow more and more of a common thing. And, you know, Aviezer Tucker did a book. He was asked, I can't remember if it's Oxford or Cambridge. I think it's Cambridge. They do this series called The Elements, and he was asked to do historiography, and he did Bayesian. Like, history is Bayesian, dudes. Like, here you go. and his whole career has been built out of trying to argue this point. He started even before me doing this. And he's now kind of like the leading guy. Like, you look at a lot, he's doing a lot of like the sort of philosophy of history. Like, he's one of the top people now. Anyway, so yeah, so that's, you know, the Bayes theorem stuff is important. And it matters, and it has had an impact in history, not as much as it should have done. And I'm doing the best I can to help with that. But, you know, what can I do? I'm just one guy.
Yeah. And I've found a lot of usefulness in, you know, I guess, changing my view of like most arguments or like discussions that I get into, because, you know, I work on 2 different call-in shows now, as well as hosting my own call-in stuff. But viewing each argument through the lens of like Bayesian reasoning, actually it really helps identify like where somebody is going off the rails.
That's right.
It shows you how they're putting more emphasis on certain things that, you know, you're not emphasizing, or you're putting a lower likelihood on. And so I think it really helps in just all areas of like discussion when we don't have like solid information.
Yeah. Would it be true to say that, like, if I'm at a stop sign and I'm trying to take a left into traffic and I'm measuring how fast that car's coming the other direction, and can I get out there and make am I doing Bayesian reasoning when I'm doing that?
Yes, not in the sense that I was referring to earlier, but your brain is Bayesian. Yeah, absolutely. Like the entire construction of your perceptual field is built out of sort of what's called a simplified Bayesian parameter. Your neurons are organized to do priors and update priors. There's a lot of neuroscience. There's a lot of like mathematical neuroscience on this, showing that our brain is doing that already. Yeah. Evolution has hit upon Bayesian construction because that's the best way to do it, right? Like,
so it's not just history; it's everything we do.
Exactly right. I'm thinking in terms of even when historians consciously make an argument, even that is Bayesian, right? So like the way that they think evidence. So this is one of the things. Like, why does evidence increase the probability of anything? Like, people often don't stop to ask that question. It's like, what even then counts as evidence? And when you say like strong evidence versus weak evidence, what does that mean? Like, why is it weak? What is, and you can ask a historian this, and they will struggle. It's kind of like, is a taco a sandwich, where like people aren't prepared for understanding this, and they're like trying to come up with a narrative that makes sense somehow, and they'll give reasons that are vaguely Bayesian, but they don't understand, like they can't link it back to the ratios and relationships that the equation is showing. And so, but you can do that, right? You can do it. You can get them there if you get them, basically do street epistemology with them and ask them, like, why do you say that this is strong evidence and this is weak evidence? What's the difference? And why does that, like, how do you figure that difference? What's your argument for one being weak and one being, what is,
so then
that kind of thing?
If you could get one of these mainstream scholars to actually have a conversation with you, would it basically come down to the value you're assigning to each piece of evidence?
Well,
you know what I'm saying?
That's called naive Bayesianism. That's like rung 2. You're supposed to get to rung 3 at least. Like, you can start there. But the thing is like, when you say that, like you say, I'm assigning a weight. It's like, well, how are you picking the weight? Like, what is that based on?
Well, like a coin in so-and-so's name, like Alexander the Great said.
Yeah.
Well, whoever. Like, well, we have all this evidence. How is it all in? How much?
When you're saying that's really good evidence, you're assigning a big weight to it. But like, why are you assigning a big weight, not a small weight? There is another level of explanation there. It really does come down to frequencies, and you can talk about, well, what frequencies are we talking about? And then you get into the question of like, well, how many forged coins, like all the coins, ancient coins we have, how frequent are forgeries? And you say, well, I don't know the exact number. And you say, okay, well, I'll move you to a different context and I'll move you back. So let's go to like, what is the probability that a meteorite is going to hit your house tonight and kill you? And so you don't know the real number, but you can guess that it's below a certain thing, right? You can say it can't be, 1 in 1,000 odds, because then meteorites would be destroying houses every 3 years, right?
Yeah.
So you can get a ballpark. You can get a sort of what's called an a fortiori estimate, where you say it can't be above this. And so you can say, like, well, the number of forgeries, is it 50%? It's not that, right? You can say, is it 10%? And so I don't think it's that high. But you say, but it's not higher, right? Okay, so let's go there. And you can get refined, you can get more detailed later, you can get more statistics later, you can lower that 10%, that's fine. But for right now, we'll just say it's 10%, because you've got enough data that the frequency of forged coins is not 10%, right? And so now you've got 90% chance it is real. And then you can walk them through, like, you're actually, all that you're doing is reasoning out frequencies. And even like the estimates of when you say it's like 80% chance I'm wrong, what do you mean? You mean 4 out of 5 times when you have the same quantity and quality of information, you will be right. Right? So if it's an 80% chance I'm going to be right, to say that means 1 out of every 5 times with the same quality of information, you'll be wrong. That's what you're saying. So you're talking about a frequency. Now we know what frequency you're talking about. Now we can start relating that to like your experience. Like, does that jive with your experience when you have this quality of evidence? Are you wrong 1 out of every 5 times? Anyway, so you could go and then you can do the a fortiori, and they say, well, I know it's less than that. I know it's not 1 in 5. It's less than that for sure. We say, but you can argue that it's 1 in 5 just because that goes against you. But if the conclusion still comes out in favor of you, and all your premises were against you, then any adjustment of those premises towards the correct number, it only makes you more certain, right? So this is how Bayesian reasoning works. And once you get someone doing it and seeing how it's all about frequencies, you're talking about a frequency, and you just have to figure out what is the frequency of, how is that frequency being determined, and so on. And I talk about all of this in detail, how you build it up from the ground up in Proving History. But the thing is, historians are already doing this all the time. Yeah. So,
but you talk about that in OHJ too, on the history.
I do a little bit. Yeah, it's a little bit in OHJ. I get more explicit in the math in obsolete paradigm, because one of the things I realized from the 10 years is people will read OHJ, not read Proving History, and kind of get lost, right? Because I assumed certain things of the reader. And I had to. I mean, it's already 600-700 pages. I can't like put a whole treatise on Bayes' theorem in there, right? So I
just trusted you. I just trusted you on the math.
Yeah, which is fair, because then like you can go back and critique the math. Like you can, I'm just gonna trust you on this, and then if I'm in doubt, I can go and dig deeper later, right? Yeah, that's totally legit. But in obsolete paradigm, I have the whole chapter where I walk people through literally from 6th grade arithmetic up.
Yeah.
And then tie it into history, trying to use examples that aren't, contentious.
Right. Yeah, sure.
And then I apply it to historical people. This is another thing people always say: like, can you apply this to some other thing that's not Jesus? So yeah, absolutely we can, and it has been done by others. And so I do that also. I say, like, well, let's apply it to Socrates. I do a whole Bayesian analysis of the historicity of Socrates. I do Apollonius of Tyana, who's on kind of the other side of the spectrum on that. And so I show, like, here's how the reasoning works with all these other people, so that you can see when you're applying it to Jesus, it's just the same thing that everybody's arguing with all the other people. Yeah. It's just that the stuff that you have that really anchors those other people doesn't exist for Jesus. And then you start to see why that matters, right? It's like, oh shit, yeah, okay. Why are we so certain Hannibal existed? Well, we have all this stuff. It's like, but we don't have any of that stuff for Jesus. Yes, that's my point. But yeah, you got to kind of like walk people through. It's like leading the donkey to the water, right? Like kind of thing. Sometimes you have to do that. Some people get it right away, but other people, yeah, like it depends on like how much time you want to devote to figuring out the math. Because Americans, I find this problem. This is mostly an American problem. I don't know if it's how widespread, but I was teaching Bayesian. I was doing this Bayesian thing with Ivy League professors, right? Like at a conference I was doing kind of like kind of like a seminar, but it was just me with a chalkboard and these.
We lost your sound for a second there, Rick.
Yeah, I saw that. So anyway, so I was talking to these professors, I think it's because I'm shaking my hands. I'm doing it's confusingly my graphics card is not adequate. Okay, so but anyway, I had this, and I talk about this a lot, but it's because it really stuck in my mind.
I've heard this.
I was doing an equation on the board, and it was 80% times 100%. And someone says, whoa, hold on. Like, how can you have 80% times 100%? That's like 800%. What kind of result is that? And I'm not going to say who this was or what their university was, but this was the top professor at a top school, top university. And I'm looking at the board while he's saying that, and I'm mortified, like, shit, like how do I respond to this? It was it was shocking. And I just did like the kindergarten teacher and just like pretended that this is normal. And said, it's just, I'd explained how 80% times 100% works. And, but then I realized wow, are we like Americans, are we really that poorly educated in math? Because that's a really bad, like if you're an Ivy League professor and you don't know how to multiply 80% to 100%, like that should be shocking.
Like even if you're not in a math profession.
No, right. But no, even if you're not, like this is 6th grade stuff, right? So now I gave literally the exact same seminar I gave to a bunch of graduate students, not even professors, in England at Oxford, right? And not only did they not ask that question, but when it came to Q&A, they were asking like advanced level fucking mathematical questions and shit. Like they totally got everything. And we're like asking really advanced stuff that I was like, wow, this is amazing. And it was like, these are humanities majors too. So these weren't math people, right?
Yeah.
And so that's really was a stark difference between how we're taking math seriously. And I think there's kind of like a lore that math is useless. It's only for nerds. Why should I waste my time on it? It's too hard, right? It's everything. Well, people tell each other that's too hard. It's not really.
This is that paradigm of once you start talking math, you've lost the argument. Like I've heard people say that.
Yeah. And it's American culture thing, I feel like.
It's like,
whereas
hey, that's just your opinion, man.
Yeah, I get so excited when I start to understand a math concept that I just wish other people could find that zone where you start, like it starts to resolve, and it's like that eureka moment when you understand why trigonometry works. I was like, that's brilliant. Who thought of that? And they're like, oh yeah, this guy. Okay. But yeah, so that's my attitude towards that. But trying to figure out ways to teach it is the thing. So at 10 years later, came out with Obsolete Paradigm. I learned some things about how to walk people through it that doesn't lose them, but you do have to want to. Right, you have to want to go. Like if you're so resistant, like you say, how dare you suggest that you need to teach me math, and then they immediately make like a horrible mathematical mistake, and I was like, I don't know what to tell you, man.
It's like when I was coaching kids playing soccer, like I can't coach you on how to try. You have to kind of bring that to the table.
You really, yes, you do. You do have to take it seriously. And the thing is if you do take it seriously, it's doable. You can do it. And because it's not hard, it's like literally 6th grade. Some of the concepts I point out are like 101 college level, but like literally undergrad 101 stuff. And that's just the concepts. Like the actual math is 6th grade. Like I literally recommend Math Doesn't Suck by Danica McKellar as like the best textbook to go back and read. And I was reading like her textbooks. She wrote a whole bunch. Her shtick at the time was to do like math for girls, right? Like to try and approach.
This is the actress, Danica McKellar?
Yeah, she's also a published mathematician.
I did not know this.
Her name's on a theorem. Anyway, so she wrote a bunch of these like books, trying to like approach it from like the culture of girls, essentially. I tell people like boys should read them because you'll learn about girls, like literally like actual important things about it. What So, but also it's a great, like it's just great. Like the Math Doesn't Suck is 6th grade. And I learned like 6th grade is like all the math that matters. Like everything after 6th grade is like specialized shit. Except maybe geometry. Like geometry is useful in normal life if people are aware of it. But algebra is less useful for the average person. But I mean, it's not useless. It's just like it's more esoteric. It's doing things that most people usually don't have to do because now we have computers that do that for you. But 6th grade is like all the stuff. Like percentages, ratios, fractions. Like there's so much in life that is, if you can master these tools, you can do so many things like including estimating whether you're going to make it across the wastelands of Nevada before stopping for gas, right? When you hit that sign that says no service for like 290 miles. Like, can I make 290 miles with what I've got? And all I've got is a vague needle point. I don't have like a specific amount of gallons in my tank. Can I figure this out? Like, can I do it in like 60 seconds? And I just have to back of napkin it. I don't have to be precise. Something like that, like that's 6th grade math, and you can do it, and it's so useful. And when you can do it in your head, like that's amazing, but I can just do that in like 30 seconds. And so anyway, yeah, that's I feel like people need to get more excited by math, and I think this part of it, the way we teach it is very like this, just monotonously boring, and it turns people off. A lot of it has to do with like math tests are designed to trick you to create like weird scenarios rather than anchoring everything in an actual thing. Right, like every question should be a real thing. Like you've got a cruise missile, and like this, it should start with a cruise missile, or it should start with you've got X number bottle of wine, right? Like it's just like, you know what I mean? Like, and you got to tile your floor, and you need to buy. You can only buy in certain amount areas. Like how many tiles do you need to get? Like these, like anchor everything in something that's real, and that's the thing is like even algebra, like it's used for a thing. So give an example of the thing. It's gonna be like, we gotta get a rocket on the moon. Okay, let's walk through this. It's actually not that hard.
But you've heard, right? I'm sure you've heard the same thing about history. The way it's taught is so poor that no one knows
I teach.
history.
I say that too. Yeah, high school, I should say, it's boring because it's names and dates and memorization.
Yeah.
Whereas in college, it's cause and effect and methodology. How do we know? And like, why did that happen? Those are way more interesting questions. But in high school, you just got to memorize shit.
Yeah.
And that's hard to get behind.
Rick, Casey wanted to let you know that you did a great job explaining it in Obsolete Paradigm.
Oh, it's worth, yeah. Thank you for saying that. Yeah, and this gets to the audiobook you were talking about.
Yeah, I was gonna let everybody know that I do have the link to both Dying for the Faith and Obsolete Paradigm in the description if anybody would like to go and get both books. Both are going to be really awesome reads. I'm currently working my way through Dying for the Faith, which I'm kind of curious, before we get to our last sort of topic here that I want to cover before we leave out, how'd you come up with the name there, Peter, Dying for the Faith? Is it, I'm guessing it relates to like the story, but I'm just kind of curious what made you settle on that.
So I wrestled with several over the course of writing the book, but basically there's, Paul died for the faith, right? We know, according to the letter from Clement, right? He was killed by either other Christians or Jews, so martyrdom is one people think of dying for the faith, but, I look at the kids who committed suicide, not the kids, but the adults who were molested as kids that committed suicide later. You could sort of look at that as dying for the faith. At least one of the priests that went to jail was killed in prison by, child molesters don't do well when they go to prison, right?
Right.
And Jesus, of course, died for the faith. So it's kind of like, how do you want to look at that term by itself? Could be applied to various different, and then giving up your life for your. I have a character say, I'm not sure I like the morality of outsourcing your morality to Jesus. Like he died for us, so I can sin all I want as long as I believe in him. I'm not so sure that's a good basis for morality. So there's all those things kind of built into that title.
I mean, if you don't sin, Jesus died for nothing.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. So let's get to sinning, right?
Yeah. But like I said, I do have links to both books, which are both of them are fabulous. For one, because we're working through the audiobook right now. I'm the one that's really slowing us down. on getting the audiobook done, to be quite honest, because I've got to edit. Like, working on editing is a pretty tedious process to make sure everything's spaced out correctly and is pleasant to listen to and everything like that, which I've heard that we've gotten really favorable like reviews and feedback from the Jesus from Outer Space audiobook. So we've made some updates to how we're doing things, and hopefully the audio is going to be a little bit better, but also pacing is going to be better too.
Yeah, which is
So
also why you know what's in the book, because it drops, like, officially leaves the presses like November 11th or something like that.
Okay.
And you can pre-order it now, so everybody can pre-order.
I did. That's why I was saying, how does she know what you did?
Yeah, right. Yeah. That's how they know what's in the book. I already have my like author collection of like 10 or whatever, and so I have people like from abroad who don't have access to Amazon who've already ordered, like, paid me extra money to sign and mail them a book. So there are a few other people in the world who actually have the physical book already. So that's possible to do that. It's just that's a really expensive way to get the book. And like I said, it'll come out much more affordably in less than a month. So but you can pre-order it now, and it'll show up as soon as it runs off the presses, even if it runs off early, because who knows when it actually gets boxed and shipped. So
Great.
Yeah. All right. So for my final question, and this is going to be one that I hear just constantly, and because I run TikTok lives, and I have this, I do call-in shows where it's primarily on the question of the historicity of Jesus, and I can't count the number of times I've run into this question, but it's like, who cares? Right? Does it even matter if Jesus is mythical, historical? What effect does that have on our lives if he is one way or another? And I've got my personal opinion about this, about like my own personal answer to this, but I'm kind of curious what y'all think about this particular question.
I guess I'll go first, and then you can go, Rich. So I definitely wrestled with this during the course of this whole thing, and I consulted with some of the people I consulted with, like, who cares? I felt like I had to bring in that other storyline to make it real, right? Like, so just blind faith because someone told you when you were young isn't good enough. And I feel like we're going to have some challenges coming, in the next in the next 5 years, that we can't just sit back and say, don't worry, God's going to take care of it. If we can't figure this shit out, I get very pessimistic. I don't want to get into that now about how pessimistic I look at things, but we're having the wrong discussions almost everywhere, politically and culturally. And if we can't sort of settle this, I don't know how we're going to answer those questions. So that's kind of why I care. I don't know if you want me to go into more detail, but I think you could probably give a better answer, Richard.
I mean, your answer is legit, and that's a good answer. I focus on a different angle of it because I'm a historian. Obviously, the first answer is, like, literally billions of people care.
Yeah.
Like, you can argue, like, what? Well, they're stupid. It's like, yeah, but they do care. So I don't know what to tell you. Like, you asked who cares. I'm just saying there's a shit ton of people who care. So the question, you could rephrase the question is, like, why should they care? Like,
right.
why?
Yeah.
And, then you get into this question of, like, so the problem is that sort of, like, runs into this thing where I don't think that obviously Christianity is a problem. Like, we absolutely should be arguing against Christianity. That matters. I don't think we need, or it's even effective to argue that Jesus didn't exist as an argument to persuade Christians to stop believing. I think it's a stupid way to go. I think debating whether Jesus existed or not is really only something atheists can do, because they're the only ones who can have an objective debate about this. So getting people out of Christianity and thus into a more sane, evidence-based worldview, that has to be done in other persuasive ways, right? Like, there are lots of, I've been doing counter apologetics, for quite a long time, 30 some years. You can do it without doubting the historicity of Jesus. It's fine. You can totally grant the historicity of Jesus and then show other things that, like, this religion is toxic. It's based on completely false beliefs and so on. you can do all of that without challenging historicity. And it's more effective rhetorically and in terms of deconversion to do it that. Now, once someone's out, now you got the question, like, why? So why, if we're just talking about like atheists, why should atheists care whether Jesus existed or not? And that's the same question that you would ask of any historical claim. And I often give the example that this is an example that my advisor gave me, not related to Jesus. He was giving the same point, but in a different context. So my dissertation advisor at Columbia was William Harris, and he's like famous historian of Rome. Like did like tons of really important, like groundbreaking studies, ancient literacy and things like that. Dreams and experience. He did a really great, like his study on how Rome used false claims of self-defense to build an empire, toppling the paradigm that they actually were just defending themselves and accidentally ended up with an empire. and I remember being taught that in high school in the 1980s. And at that time, when I was being taught that, his book had already been published refuting that claim. It's like, no, this was all bullshit. This is fucking neocon shit. They were like, making this up. It's like, oh yeah, Charlie Kirk was, killed by a massively funded conspiracy of liberal organizations. No, it's literally that kind of, we're going to make that story to justify doing all the shit we want to do. That's exactly how Rome conquered. And he had a really meticulous, really good, culturally based, Roman culture was really elemental to this. And so fantastic. Anyway, so he was telling the class at this time, but I was his graduate student instructor, but he's saying like you should never think anything is trivial in history. Like everything is important, because he didn't use the analogy of memory cells, but I did later in a paper where historians are the memory cells of society, right? Like, so are we going to be people who suffer from dementia and hallucination? Is our society's memory going to be bogus? Or is it going to be more accurate, right? Like, are we going to have a more accurate or a less accurate memory of the world and our history? And so it matters to how you interpret the Gospels, how you understand what the authors are doing, right? Like if you understand that they don't give a shit whether Jesus existed, they're just telling stories to convince you of certain ideas. The gospel, they want to message you this gospel idea. They have these ideas, so they're making up stories about this guy to do this. If you don't understand that, you're gonna, if you think it's just oral lore that was passed down, they're like, oh, this is interesting. I don't know why that happened, but I'm going to write it down. If you think that's what, you're completely wrong about how history has gone. You're completely wrong about how to interpret the Gospels. Like this, you might think that's trivial, and it is in a way, like compared to other things, brain surgery and solving the Middle East crisis and all. Like, you're not going to do it with this. Yes, we know that. But it is still important that we get history right? Like it really does matter. And like you said, if people are getting it wrong and are persistently, doggedly insisting on getting it wrong, then there's a rat in the house. Like there's something wrong with the system that you can't trust anymore. So that even the respectability of history as a field, of biblical studies as a field, depends on its willingness to actually admit when they're wrong about something and revise. And so the example that my advisor gave was like, there was this guy, I think he was French. Anyway, I can't remember the name of the fellow, but he did this dissertation I think it was early 20th century. He did his dissertation on dolls, ancient dolls. And everybody was telling him, that's a dumb subject. That's so trivial. Who cares? Who cares about ancient dolls? And my advisor explained, like, okay, first of all, like, no one had done this before. Secondly, dolls tell you shit tons of things about the culture, your assumptions, like how it tells you things about how you're raising your kids, what sort of ideas you're imposing, and so on. It tells you things about the economy, like where are toys coming from? Who makes them? Right? Is there a toy industry, or is this just something dad makes for your kids? Right? Like these are like things that tell you things about how we were once, right? And so that really matters. So like it was really crude. Like that was one of the most important dissertations. It's on this supposedly trivial subject about dolls. And in my book on the scientist in the early Roman Empire, I give the example of this early 19th century historian who wrote a book on soap, the history of soap. And he has this whole like opening chapter apologizing for writing such a long treatise on such a trivial a lowly trivial subject. And so he's explaining why it's important to understand the history of soap. And once you get to the end of his explanation, you go, yeah, he's right. why were we ever saying who cares about the history of soap? Like, we should never have said that to begin with. Like, he should not have had to write that chapter. It's an important, yeah, we need the history of soap. I'm sorry. Like, we got to know that. And so, like, yeah, it's trivial relative to many other things, right? Like that, absolutely. But that's like most of science, most of history, most of any knowledge field is full of trivial data. But and if you're going to build any big story or anything that's important, you need all the little stuff worked out, right? Like sometimes little things matter. And when you look at, like, in Obsolete Paradigm in chapter 6, I do the first half on Luke's 2 swords pericope, the story about Jesus is this weird claim about you need swords and we have 2 and that's enough. And you're like, what the fuck is that about? And if you go through that, how we understand what's going on there, it means you have to get behind pop culture when Luke was written, right? So you get to, like, what was the hot thing? What was the new, the new novel? What was the new Stephen King novel that was, like, confusing everybody and creating all sorts of political tension and stuff? You got to know that stuff. It seems trivial, but you got to know that stuff to understand the gospel story. So if you think understanding the gospels is important at all, then that supposedly trivial thing about what was pop culture saying at the time, what hot new novel was on the market, and, like, what was the argument, you got to know that stuff. And then even, like, there's aspects of the argument come into, like, what does a sword cost? Compared to, like, because Jesus says sell your shawl and buy a sword, and then someone thought to ask, like, wait a minute, could you buy a sword what you sell a shawl for? Like, you're talking about, like, cheap textile and a precision steelwork, like, that can't be commensurate. Like, you can't just sell a shawl and buy a sword with it. Like, that doesn't make any sense.
Well, maybe you throw in a bar of soap. And you
Yeah. Well, so anyway, the point is, like, these little trivial things matter when you need to answer big questions. You've got big questions are built all these out of these little things. And so, like, when you get to, like, the historicity of Jesus, it's actually less important whether Jesus existed or not than that the religion began with visions and stories to reify the meaning of those visions and so on. So understanding the cultural context, the political context of basically what your book is about, like, why did they do this? Understanding that is a big question. That's not trivial, because the same fucking shit is happening now, where we got these, like, we're building false narratives to push political agendas. So we're making fake stories. Haitians are eating pets now, right? Like it's the exact same damn thing. Like, it's all based on myth. Every political ideology that literally kills thousands of people or saves thousands of people, like, the most important things are based on mythologies, and those mythologies are built out of methodologies that are the same methodologies that were used to build Christianity in the beginning. So, like, you've got to understand how Christianity began and was built. Because if you don't understand that, you don't understand what's going on now, right? Like, you don't understand what the neocons and the MAGA movement and all that stuff, what are they doing? They're doing the same damn thing, and you're falling for it, right? Like, so obviously it's important, right? We really should give a shit about this for this reason. But you do have to, like, make the connections between the little things and the big things. And so that's why it's not really about Jesus. It's really about the origins of Christianity and the politics of ideological movements.
And the power of stories, in general. Have you guys read Harari, Sapiens?
No, I haven't, but I'm familiar with the context.
Because that really opened my eyes to all, like money is a story, right? Nationalism, like it that's what separated us from the other types of humanoids that were existing at that time, but also all the other animals, is the ability to tell stories that allow you to collaborate beyond your tribe or your family or your lineage and nationally. Yeah. And it doesn't have to be true. That's the right. And so if you realize that this has been true for thousands of years, like, that can really, like, open up your resolve and realize, like, oh, okay, this isn't a new thing. Right. This has been going on for a long time. It's the same story over and over. And so then you can build better tools to fight it. So hopefully
resist it, etc.
If my book gets people to think, oh, this is all a story, maybe we need newer and better stories to get people to collaborate beyond where we are today. Because
it's funny. I always say, like, I think kind of the ultimate paradigm shift is to stop needing your myths to be true But the thing is like people's often like they anchor their ideology in the myths being true, right? So like there are these mythologies of like there's this story that gets told about how government spending is bad because there was this highway that people were building and they just put in a bunch of grass because they're supposed to put in grass, but they didn't put in sprinklers, and so the grass just died, and that was just a waste of money. And it's like you look into this and you find out that not a single part of that story is true. But they were using that myth to sell the idea that government shouldn't invest in infrastructure. But of course, that's false, right? Like the conclusion is false and the story is bogus. And the story is false. And that matters because the ideology is based on the story being true. Conversely, you can talk about like you talk about people who refer to like Star Trek as having deep and important ideas about how we should organize society, how we should relate to each other as people, that do not require you to believe that it's true, right? So that you can admit that that's not true, that didn't happen, I totally agree, but it captures something that is true, and we can prove that. We can go back to anthropology and psychology and show that that thing is true, and this story is just a great way to communicate to you the thing that is backed by all this empirical evidence and science. And so that when you get to that point where you can use like Star Trek or Star Wars, you know, like the Andor series is a perfect example, which is so weird because it was all made before the Trump shit happened, and yet is practically like prophetic of everything that's going on, right? Like how the fuck did they do that? Well, you know how they did that is because they looked at like a million other examples of this happening in history and told a fictional story. You can admit that Andor is 100% false. None of that happened. But it captures a series of things that has happened so many times over and over again that we're really dumb to not like get when it's happening again, right?
I don't know if you remember.
So yeah. So you can still use fiction to admit it's fiction, and it can still have a truth.
Yeah.
And that is how the gospel authors thought they were writing the gospels.
Right. Yeah.
And that's kind of what your book is about, really.
So one last thing, John, and then because I know we're already beyond. But in my original little slides presentation, I had a quote and I attributed it to John. So I had that Corinthians thing. I had another one from Paul about speaking in tongues and blah, blah, blah. But I had one by John, section, chapter, whatever. And it was like, you know, and the apostles, I quoted Lord of the Rings, the scene where he says, you know, so do all, I wish this never happened. And Gandalf says, so do all who see such times, but that is not for us to decide. For all you have to decide is what to do with the time that is given you. And I have it as John chapter 11, whatever. But it's like fiction giving great wisdom.
Yeah.
No one thinks Lord of the Rings is true.
That's right.
But it's I can't wait for a religion to be based on Tolkien, you know?
Yeah.
And then you'll have people arguing about did Peter Jackson take over, and who's the founder? Is it Tolkien or Jackson?
Back. Yeah, that's a really good point, and it connects back to the question that was we brought up before.
Right.
Is that I talk about the null thesis on the historicity of Jesus. There's this tendency for religions to reify their myths. That in order to, it's the same thing like that example I gave of like the grass, the story about the grass that the government planted that let wilt. So that didn't happen, but it's necessary for them to believe that it happened for them to maintain the ideology. Haitians eat pets is a perfect example of this. It's like if you want to believe that it is righteous and just to take all these Haitian refugees and kick them out of the country, then you have to believe Haitians eat pets, because then that justifies everything. Because they're just horrible people that eat pets. So definitely got to get rid of them, right? So religions have this tendency to need to reify. So if you had a religion based on Tolkien, they would start to have to sell that as the truth. Because if you don't, here's the problem. This is what the problem with liberal Christianity generally is, that you end up with no real text, because now the truth is all about how a human interprets the text. You're surrendering authority to any Joe Blow who walks up and reinterprets the text. If you want to like maintain hierarchy and control, if you're like that kind of person, you want to have Plato's Republic, then you have to prevent that. So the only way to prevent people from reinterpreting the myths is to say that the myths are true, because then there's no other way to interpret them, right? Yeah. And it's like, it's what it said. That's fucking what happened. That's it, right? Like there's no room for saying it. didn't happen or whatever. There's no room for reinterpreting it as a message. So that's like I was talking to this libertarian Christian once. Yes, a libertarian Christian. And he was interpreting the parable of the talents as a pro-capitalist message. It's like, if you think the parable of talents is actually about talents, like money, you've completely missed the point of that story. But you can see how, like, if you're a libertarian and a Christian, you absolutely need that parable to be about actual money and investment and stuff.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it's completely contrary. It's telling the opposite story that you want to tell. So anyway, that's the risk of religions. That religions always have to reify things. And when you have like the liberal religions who are admitting that we're not going to reify them, well, they become squishy, and then people leave because, like, why? Well, then you get to the point, well, if it's just all interpretation, I can just go interpret Star Wars. I don't need the Bible. Like,
exactly. Yeah.
So that's why liberal Christianity is kind of like the sort of gateway drug to just non-religion altogether, essentially.
Right. Yeah.
And that's why liberal Christianity survives on community, on ritual, on like giving people a place to go on Sunday. You know, and
oh, sorry, Rick, we lost your.
Yeah, this time.
Yeah, I saw that. Okay, but yeah, anyway, that's the. That's my spiel.
Thank you so much, though, John, and obviously Richard too. But John, thank you and I know we went past an hour and a half, but I appreciate your.
Oh no, yeah, it was a good conversation. I wasn't about to stop the momentum there. Yes. We do have a few super chats to address, though. We've got the Sinister Porpoise who says, "When do the Babylonians build wooden submarines?" I'm not sure I understand that one.
I don't know what the joke is reference to. Although the concept of wooden submarines is an interesting one.
I didn't include that in my book. If that's
okay. Well, there's all these like ancient alien stuff, right? That would get into those kinds of things. That they used to have. They had helicopters. Didn't you know the Egyptians had helicopters?
Yeah. And then Limited Light said 851, which I'm not exactly sure what that
I sure
was.
Hope that's not a Nazi thing. I don't know.
No, I don't think that is.
I've heard of rum 151, but not 851.
Yeah. And then finally,
is it the UFO? I'm not the UFO. Is it the submarine? Did I have the submarine wrong?
571. You said 571.
Yeah, it's 571. Yeah, okay, it is 571. All right.
Okay. And then there's Kristen Hood who says Betty Crocker never existed, so get more takeout. Great show as always.
Oh, good.
So yeah. And I definitely appreciate y'all coming on. And I'm sorry that I wasn't able to finish your book before the show, Peter. But I am reading through it, and I'm very intrigued by it. I know when a few years ago, I had the idea as like, I feel what a lot of people want is just a comparable story that makes sense. And I feel like, you've probably presented a very compelling, like, at least alternative idea as to how easily it could have come about without a physical person, at the center of it, because that seems to be what people hang on to. It's like, well, it has to be this, but it's like, what evidence do we have to say that it has to be that way? And it just seems to come off as just pure ad hoc speculation, as to what keeps that there. So I'm going to keep reading through it, and I can't wait to finish it. And but in any case, Peter and Rick, I want you both to shill all of your stuff before we leave out today. We'll start with Peter, and then we'll head on out.
Yeah, the only thing I have to promote is the book Dying for the Faith, and everyone who's read it has given me high marks. It's just getting the word out, and these conversations, some conversations like the ones I depict, had to have happened whether he was real or not, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so,
right.
So somebody wrote these Gospels, and there were 17 or 27 other ones in addition to this. So I feel like putting a face onto it is a good step towards changing that paradigm, because people need to sort of visualize how could how could a thing that happened in outer space become the most powerful religion? Well, Honi the circle drawer was a guy, like, so if he made it into Josephus and Jesus of Nazareth didn't, then what does that tell you about what was going on in first century AD in Judea, right? Like, crazier things have been put out there, and this was such an under the radar movement until Constantine said, "Hey, I like this story. We got the carrot and the stick in one story," right? Like, Jesus is watching from above, and your life sucks, but only for your life expectancy was 35 years. What's that compared to a eternity in heaven with Jesus and streets paved with gold and all of that? Like, I could see how the Emperor of Rome would say, "I like this story because this is going to be crowd control for the next." However.
Yeah. He also liked that it was an institution he could co-opt that spanned both halves of the empire that he was trying to reunite.
Yeah.
And his enemy was their enemy. So what's the best strategy? Side with the Christians to undermine your enemy, right, and then defeat your opponent in a civil war. So yeah, I mean, it was just fortuitous, and then of course, then he cursed us with this unfortunately inevitably fascist religion for 2,000 years. Yeah,
but that's all I got. But again, thank you for the platform.
Yeah, I appreciate having you here. And then Rick, why don't you show your stuff? Which, by the way, everybody, I have both links to the Amazon pages for both Obsolete Paradigm and Dying for the Faith in the description if you would like to hit those up and get those books.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I teach courses. I've got social media. I've got a lot of books. I've got my blog. I live off of the support of patrons and so on. So if you want to support my work, patrons get perks you can find out on Patreon. All of that stuff, you can go and check it out. And I do different things with different social media. So go to my website, richardcarrier.info. You can search there for guide to social media, where I talk about what you'll find out on my different feeds, and I do different things on different feeds. And so there's lots just to do there. But really, I would say get Obsolete Paradigm of a Historical Jesus, even if you're new to this, because that's kind of like your entryway. The book is a really good way to just get into the debate. It's kind of like, the Iliad, or the Odyssey, where it's in media res. You're diving in the middle, but you'll be able to follow the plot, and then you can go get the exciting prequels to dive further in. And so I think it's a good gateway drug. Largely because I feel like I'm really happy with the writing of this book. I think, John, you and KC have seen that and kind of agree, right? This is I feel like I've done a good job of explaining things in this. It's not dry, but it's not too colloquial. It's got the right amount of footnotes, right? It's got all that stuff. And
would you say it's less textbooky than On the Historicity of Jesus?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, absolutely. It's less academic-ease, and yet it is just as academic. So the no quality is suffered. It's just that I'm look, let's just talk about this stuff. And so, especially if you look at the table of contents, you'll see where it's going, and so you'll know what each chapter is doing, and so you can get through it and so on. But yeah, it refers back, but it's if you want to go back, you can get to On the Historicity of Jesus. You can go to Proving History. You can even go read the critics that I cite and compare what they say with what I'm saying they say, and see who's snowing you here. So anyway, that's all. It's all in the book. So yeah, Obsolete Paradigm of a Historical Jesus is. I'm happy with the book, and so it is not fiction. It is history, but it will be interesting, and it's useful in a lot of ways. If you want to understand Bayesian reasoning better, it gives you a lot of great examples. If you want to understand different aspects of this question better, it does that. That's the point of this book, is to explain things like the Brother of Jesus thing. Got a whole chapter on it with cited new scholarship and all kinds of stuff that's going on in there, and explain it in plain terms. So there's a lot in there that's useful on the historicity of Jesus, and just on history. If you want to do history better or analyze history better, this is a lesson in that as well. So that's kind of the point of the book. So that's what I'm shilling today, is Obsolete Paradigm.
Do you cover all the elements of the context of what was going on in
first
century?
What Rome? I do is I do an update. So On the Historicity of Jesus, I have 48 elements of background knowledge. that I think a lot of people that reorient people. It's part of a paradigm shifting, right? It's like you've got to understand the ancient context. You need these 48 elements. A lot of people who try to reason about this don't know about those 48. They might know some of them, but not all of them. Yeah. Even professors of this subject don't know all of them. I've run into many. That's why there's 48 of them, is because each one is something that I've run into a professor who didn't know one of those things, at least one. So they all had to be in there. In obsolete paradigm, what I do is say, what's changed? And so the question is, like, none of them have been refuted. They're all, in fact, they're all more reinforced than they were then. Some of them a lot more. And so I talk about, like, here's what's been published in the last 10 years on those particular elements. Even in the index, you can go right to the obsolete paradigm, to the index for elements, and you'll see them numbered. So if you want to see what's changed for each numbered element of the 48, you can just go right to it if that's what you want to do, if you're someone coming from that position. But if you're coming at it from obsolete paradigm, you don't need to know the original 48. You'll just go through the book with the ones that I talk about. And then, like, if you get angry, like you get to like talking about element 22 or whatever, and like, that can't be true, then you know what to do. Like the citations are there. You can go back to on the obsolete, on the historicity of Jesus, check the bibliography there and so on. So that basically the threads, all the breadcrumbs are there for you. So like it's a great starter kit for this question of the historicity of Jesus.
I totally agree. And I've had to use Proving History as well as On the Historicity of Jesus as like reference material. Like I continuously go back and re-up my just general knowledge about different topics there. But I do appreciate both of you guys taking time out to come on the show today and everything. Definitely everybody hit up those links down below, get those books. They're both great. Pre-order Rick's book, but also get Dying for the Faith. If you like the sort of dramatized sort of novelesque kind of stuff, it's definitely something that you won't be able to put down. I mean, I've started I don't read a lot of fictional stuff. Like I read more like nonfiction things, but this is so far it's a really good book. So I appreciate you, Peter, for coming up here and everything like that. And I hope everybody has a great night. And I will talk to everybody later. Don't forget to stand up and use your voice. Bye, heathens.
Cheers.